In this video, we're going to talk about solving absolute value equations and inequalities. Just like with section 8.4, this one's going to be in multiple parts. So first I want you to think about what is the absolute value, okay? So the absolute value of a number is the distance that number is away from zero. So if you think about a number line, when you think about distance, I think of it as how many steps away from zero is something. Like if I were to walk to that spot, how many steps would it take me? So a lot of times people think of, oh, it's just absolute value, it just means that it's positive. Well, yes and no. The reason it is positive is because we're talking about distance, okay? So if I say 2, for example, if I'm here at 2, what is the absolute value of 2? Meaning, how many steps did it take to get to 2? If I start at 0, I take 1 step, 2 steps. The absolute value of 2 is 2. Similarly, if I'm over here at negative 3, and I say, what is the absolute value of negative 3? Well, how many steps did it take me to get there? It took me 1, 2, 3 steps to get over to negative 3. So the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. So I want you to consider what number or numbers are 5 steps away from 0. So thinking of this number line, if I extended it out a little bit more, what numbers would be 5 steps away from 0? Well, 5, I start at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, out here. And if I went in the other direction, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I would be out here at negative 5. Okay. So when you're solving, that's essentially what you're doing, is you're saying to yourself, what number x can I put in here so that if I go from 0 to that spot x, I have taken 17 steps. Okay? So what I'm essentially doing is I'm saying, well, x equals 17, right? And also x equals negative 17. And those are my two solutions for this absolute value. You have to have both. If you don't have both, you haven't solved the problem correctly. Okay? So imagine I didn't have this in here, and I said the absolute value of this thing equals 1. Well, what does this thing need to be in here? Well, it needs to be either 1 or it needs to be negative 1. So now I look at this problem and I take that which is inside my absolute value symbols and I set it equal to just those two things, 1 and negative 1. Okay? And then I can solve. Well, let's solve. So I subtract 7. I get x equals negative 6. Plug that back in here. Negative 6 plus 7 is 1. The absolute value of 1 equals 1. Good, that works. Now I solve this one. Again, I'm subtracting 7 from both sides. And I get x equals negative 8. Check it. Negative 8 plus 7, that's negative 1. The absolute value of negative 1 equals 1, so we're good there. Okay. Now let's try this one. The absolute value of 6 minus 2x equals 12. Well, we're going to do just like we did on the last one. I take 6 minus 2x, and I set it equal to 12. And I take 6 minus 2x, and I set it equal to negative 12. And then we just solve. This is not so bad. So I get negative 2x equals 6. And I divide by negative 2, and I get x equals negative 3. Similarly here, I'm just solving for x. I get negative 2x equals negative 18. And then when I divide by negative 2, I get x equals 9. You can check that both of those solutions work by plugging them back in to the original equation. Now, if it says solve and check, I would expect to see that work. If it doesn't say check, well, it's still a pretty good idea to check it just to make sure your answer is right. The thing you need to know is that you must isolate the absolute value expression before you write that compound in a statement, which is when you break it up into the two separate equations, like here and here. Okay? So while we start here, we're going to set this equal, we're going to get this absolute value piece by itself. So I'm going to start by subtracting 6 from both sides. So now I have negative 2 times the absolute value of 1/4 x plus 5. That equals 0. So now I'm going to divide by negative 2. I'm treating it kind of like a set of parentheses at first, because they are considered grouping brackets, grouping symbols. Okay, 1/4 x plus 5 equals 0. Now I can break it up into my two separate inequalities. The first one would be 1/4 x plus 5 equals 0. And the next one would be 1/4 x plus 5 equals, wait, negative 0? Well, we have no such thing as negative 0. So, in fact, when you have an absolute value of something equals 0, you will only have one solution. That's an important thing to remember, okay? So let's just go ahead and solve for it. So I have 1/4 x equals negative 5. To get this by itself, I'm going to multiply by 4/1. And I get x equals negative 20. Go ahead, you can plug that back in to your absolute value equation. Make sure that you got the right answer, okay? So when you're dealing with absolute value equations, remember we get the absolute value symbols by itself, and then we set it equal to, in this case there was only one equation, but in our previous example it was set it equal to 12 and equal to negative 12 in order to find the two solutions. Okay, so that's working with absolute value equations to begin with. We'll see you in the next video.